Chapter 24. Ted Anderson. No matter what good you accomplish, there is no point in helping others. In the end, you will find that humans are selfish, conniving little dastardly creatures that aren't worth saving. Ted Anderson looked up into the sky, the red ashes floating up like reverse snowfall. His left arm had a sharp piece of metal impaled in it, and his warm blood streamed down his arm and into the hot Nevada sand. He pulled the knife out and let it drop through his fingers onto the ground. He breathed deeply as he walked away from the carnage, avoiding the stench of dead bodies piled up high in the sand. His right arm dragged his AR-15, and his trigger finger rested on the side of his rifle, away from the trigger. His eyes drooped down, and his mouth was open wide as if to say something, but he couldn't muster up the courage to speak. He walked towards the FOB. He smelled the burned-out oil and fuel. The rotting flesh assaulted his nose as flies buzzed around the dead. The Nevada sand was filled with blood after all of this. There were many other soldiers walking around with stretchers, trying to get the wounded out of the way before starting the long, arduous process of identifying the dead. The burning gunpowder still filled the air, and he could still hear the loud revving of truck engines and the movement of the tanks as they were being driven away. He looked at the desert sand and was haunted with the sight that would never leave his mind. Bodies littered the desert, so many one wouldn't think there was a desert out there. Limbs strewn all over the place, the uniforms torn to shreds, and even helicopter parts were on fire, blown up out of the sky. There were numerous blown parts from missiles that littered the flaming sands. He stepped over the bodies, looking at the numerous dog tags on the necks of his fallen comrades, many of which their faces were unrecognisable. Many of them no longer had faces, and some missed their dog tags. Identifying this many was going to be damn near impossible without DNA testing for identity. And then he found something most peculiar about many of them. Not all of them had an American flag on their emblem patch. Some wore the patch of Russia, Ukraine, France, Italy, and China. What were they all doing here? He thought. Sergeant Anderson, said a soft but ragged voice. He turned swiftly and saw none other than Lieutenant Nakamura. Go get some rest. You need it. Yes, ma'am. He walked over the corpses of the unnamed soldiers. He continued to cover his mouth as the flies were beginning to buzz around him like they thought him dead. He found an angry platoon, dragging severed limbs and corpses, a small amount of corpses into a pit. He watched them, and he was able to identify most of these individuals, man and woman alike. These were the corpses of Task Force 7, every single one of them. 2 masked soldiers came from behind him, holding large red plastic oil containers. They made it down to the pit with the bodies and dismembered limbs. Behind him was another man, an ensign, Ensign Malcolm. He looked down angrily at the bodies as 2 soldiers poured gasoline on them. The ensign took out a match and lit them aflame. There was one still alive. Her fair but dirty face began to scream in agony as her face caught on fire. Her fists barely clenched. "I'll kill you! I'll kill you! I'll kill you! I'll kill all of you!" "Sir?" One of the masked men pointed his pistol at her screaming head. "Negative. She'll be dead soon enough. No use of wasting another round. We've already used enough of those as it is." "What did they do?" Anderson asked. "They didn't deserve this. Evidence was found on Ghost that he was colluding with Germany to stage a coup. They are traitors," the ensign answered. "Now, don't get yourself in too deep in all of this, Anderson. Much of this is need to know, and you don't need to know any more than you do now." "Yes, sir," he about-faced. "Best stay out of it, Anderson." Anderson left it at that, and continued dragging his weapon in the sand as bodies were being counted and collected, being sent to the medics for identification. The amount was staggering. He continued walking to the FOB. "Didn't we just broker international peace? Ghost, why would you do this? At least I can finally go home." The entire firefight was completely endless and over-exhausting. Ted knew he had been sleepless for nearly 2 weeks, and he wasn't even present for half of it. His legs were heavy, his arms were weak, and his spirit felt like it was being shackled inside his chest as he took heavy breaths, his lungs expanding. "It's over," he said under his breath. "I don't know what this was all about, and I don't care anymore. At least the world will be a little safer." Sergeant Ted Anderson never questioned any of the orders given to him over the last 2 weeks. 6 months later, Ted went on leave for a full week before returning back to active duty. No new wars were declared, no recent terrorist activity in the Middle East nor here in the United States. It looked like the military was about to do some downsizing or pushing people out of the service. There was now next to no need for an overabundant military force. The army was going to be cut first. Ted was on base in Fort Bennington, Georgia. He was running his half-marathon in the oppressive heat. He stopped towards the end, leaning against a Humvee, sweating profusely, and inhaled the fresh scent of his own body odour. He went to the barracks and showered before heading back into his office to finish off some paperwork. He planned to resign today. He was in his office on the computer and printing out some paperwork for his discharge. There was a knock on the door. He looked up. It was Sergeant Hernandez. "Sergeant, you're wanted with Lieutenant Nakamura immediately." "Copy." He sighed as he got up from his chair. He followed the private down some lengthy halls through Georgia. He moved around and listened very closely to the conversations around the hallway. Some small talk, others were more political in nature. He didn't care. Today's the day. He was ushered into Nakamura's office. She held a clipboard and pointed to a chair. "Have a seat." Hernandez closed the door behind him as he took the seat in the black chair. "Anderson, you're being reassigned," she said, looking him in the eye with a soft glare. "Effective immediately, you're being shipped out to Germany." "Fantastic. How are you holding up over that little incident?" She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms over her chest. "All things considered, could be worse," he said. "You crazy bitch." "It was hell on all of us. We're not going to recover from that," she sighed. "Many good men and women died." "It's behind us. Are we done?" "Yes, if you're psychologically fit, you're flying out at 0600 tomorrow." "Thanks." Ted got up from his chair and went to the door. His hand touched the doorknob. He turned to her as she filed the paperwork away. "Nakamura?" "Anderson?" She looked back at him from her desk. "I'd tell you to go to hell, but I think they would spit you back out," he told her coldly as his eyes angled down his nose. "Excuse me?" She glared at him. "Hell is too good a place for you," Ted scowled. "Why did we kill them?" "Treason." She gritted her teeth, leaning back in her chair. "Horse shit," Ted shot back. "I want the real reason, Nakamura. If I kill them, I want to know why. Now tell me." "War's stopped. They made that happen. There's no need for them anymore," she answered. "You could have discharged them. What the hell, Nakamura?" Ted was unsatisfied with the answer. He kept his voice down so as not to draw attention from outside her office. "Really?" She frowned. "Really, Anderson? You don't know all the details. You'd best leave it alone. Knowing all the details as I do, I know there was no chance in hell they could integrate back into civvy life. Besides, too much confidential information is on the line should they be released out into the world. You don't know the details. You don't need to know. Now get out of my office." She stood up, pointed violently at the door behind him. Unsatisfied, he swiftly jumped over her desk and tackled her to the ground before she could scream. The various items from her desk slid off to the floor. His hands clasped around her neck and pulled her up from the ground. She was striking him with her hand and tried to release his grip. "Hell is too good a place for you. What the hell were you thinking? What's wrong with you? They were just kids, damn it. They were just kids. You know full well as I do they did nothing to deserve any of it." Crack! Her arms immediately dropped down. He released her corpse to the floor as it tumbled. He opened the door and briskly walked out of the room, closing it behind him. Good riddance.